He's joining us now from our Abuja studio to review top headlines in Nigeria this week. He's Associate Professor at Baze University, Dr. Biodun Adeniyi. Dr. Glad to have you join us this morning.
My pleasure.
Good. All right. Let's start with the appointment of Professor Ibrahim Agbola Gambari as the new COS to the President Muhammadu Buhari. What would you expect him to do differently from his predecessor, late Malam Abba Kyari?
Well, I think Gambari is a rounded person, rounded in the sense of his multiple accomplishments as an outstanding scholar, as a diplomat, as a public administrator. And when somebody has that kind of very rich pedigree, you expect that it will be brought to bear wherever he finds him or herself, in terms of the pedestal of power. In this circumstance, Gambari has been fortunate, to been asked to come and bring his wealth of experience to bear close to the president. We expect it to manifest, but let's not forget to make a distinction between his previous experiences and the new one. Where he is now is a nebulous space, a political space where so many things are unpredictable, where negotiations are very necessary, where things are plural because you'll be dealing or contending with multiple interests. But previously, he's been in very structured, organized environments, so his acumen, his intellectual acumen will also be brought to bear in terms of trying to navigate between a structured environment and an atmosphere that is politically charged, where things are unpredictable, where interests are conflicting and are multiplying. So you expect Gambari to thrive very well anyway, because he's got the scholarship and the background and the experience, to make things happen in terms of advising the president appropriately and in terms of shielding the president, acting like a libero, like a sweeper, shielding the president from the kind of shots that he shouldn't receive in his privacy. So we expect him to be not just having been a rounded scholar, a rounded person, we expect him to also be a rounded stabilizer of the presidency, as it were, in the Anadefemi.
Oh, thank you. Very good to see you again, Dr. Biodun, to see you, sadly,
my pleasure.
through the camera lens. But I wanted to further the point on the new chief of staff there. If we look at his predecessor, the late Malam Abba Kyari, we know that he, despite keeping a low profile, we knew who he was, and he definitely moved in silence, was able to acquire this power and this reputation, albeit relatively quietly. Do you think that the new chief of staff, Gambari, would follow in those footsteps, or do you expect him to be a bit more of a vocal character, more visible than his predecessor?
But I think everything is going to revolve around the preferences, the predilections of the president, because the president appointed them in the first place, and they've always told us that it is the president's prerogative, even if he acted on recommendation. So irrespective of their own tendencies, whatever tendencies they have is going to be subjected to the whims of the president largely. But again, let's not forget that the president has constructed that office larger than we used to know it. Abdullahi Mohammed as chief of staff, to Obasanjo was a bit on the quiet side. Michael Gardema as chief of staff to President Jonathan was a bit on the quiet side. And General Rugbofa was a bit on the quiet side as well, not just in terms of their own preferences, but in terms of how the president, their principal, defined the office. But in the circumstance, we have a president who has defined the office differently. He has constructed it differently by asking ministers, to come to him through the chief of staff. So he gave that office a larger-than-life office, a very, very influential, and respectable office, much more than we've been knowing it. So how the personality holding that office now comes into the fray, is going to be a product, of the person's own character as well. But comparing the two, well, maybe a fair or an unfair game. Both of them well-schooled gentlemen, Ivy League institutions, and other than that, you will say matured, consequential exposure, but I don't see anything markedly different coming out of their personalities. I just believe that, they are going to carry worked in that office based on the dictates of the president. I don't see a Gambari doing the same. They are doing something different. But between the two of them, you will see temperate individuals, calm, calculated individuals, people with perhaps epistemic disposition. So I still see Gambari exhibiting those traits. I'm not seeing anything different anyway. And do not forget the fact that the president will eventually call the shot. The buck will eventually stop at the table of the president.
Doctor, I'd love you to evaluate the statement of the new COS. He said his duty is to the president and not to the people. It is the president that has a mandate, not him. I must also add that he promised to be loyal both to the president and to Nigeria.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate that statement?
That's right. Oh, well, that statement was a bit pregnant, somewhat loaded. And let's not forget the circumstance in which he was asked, he was probably still overwhelmed, still flustered a bit. He was just coming into the office and he was under pressure, by the press to make some comments. And he just was looking for a way to escape and said, well, my loyalty and my accountability is to the president, not to the people of Nigeria. Somewhat contemptuous of the people there, but I'm not going to hold it against him because of the circumstance in which he was asked that question. But ordinarily, again, as a matter of fact, his responsibility is directly to the president, but he does not have to give us an everyday briefing, an everyday explanation on what he's doing and what he's not doing. It goes to the president straight, and the president delegates any of his lieutenants in form of ministers, in form of aides, to go and let the people know, to explain to the people. So accountability flows from the president through his lieutenants, but not necessarily to the chief of staff. But again, on another note, perhaps on a moral, ethical note, that office is a public office. The office is not a family affair. It belongs to the Federal Republic of Nigeria, even though it is not constitutional. And as a result, whether your loyalty is to any person or the other, directly or indirectly, you are somewhat accountable, to the people of Nigeria, because the office is serviced through the tax paid by the people of this country. But in the technical sense of the word, he was right. Perhaps he shouldn't have said it, even if we know it. In terms of public relation, in terms of image management, brand, in terms of brand conception, it was a bit off the mark, and it's marked of contempt for the people. But like I said again, I'm not going to hold it against him because he wasn't supposed to talk or to talk as much as he did when he made a statement, indeed.
Management, indeed. I love the way you put it.
Well, Dr. Biodun, if we could change gears ever so gently and focus on another story. I know you're here to talk to us about a few issues that happened over the course of this week. And I think before we get into the usual suspects of coronavirus and COVID-19 and how we're dealing with life under curfew, a story that seems to have faded into the background is that of Leah Sharibu. And we know that recently her mother said that she, at this point, is so desperate to have her daughter return to her that she'd be willing to accept Boko Haram as an in-law. It's been years since Leah was taken from Dapchi. And at this point, what do you think needs to be done to facilitate a fast return of this child? It does feel as though, in as much as we talk about her very much on this channel, her story does seem to be fading from the forefront of the minds of the people in power. What do you say to that?
Leah's case is very unfortunate, Adefemi. And if you have a sister, a daughter, or a niece, and you won't imagine how you will feel if that person has to go through any kind of trial or tribulation, physical, as the case of Leah Sharibu is. So it's a very, very painful thing. It's a letdown on our humanity, and it's a continuous pain, on our psychology, and you will just want to say that whatever the government can do, whatever the authorities can do, they should just go ahead and do it and bring that girl out of where she is. And of course, you can't blame the mom. In this kind of situation, you just want her released under any condition. And I'm not going to blame the mom for making those concessions in parentheses. It's just the pain and the stress of motherhood. So I think government should probably do more. I know sometimes we've been told about how much they are demanding. Sometimes we've also been told about the need for government not to pay ransom endlessly, because paying ransom means that the insurgents will now go and rearm and continue to terrorize us. So there are so many ways to these things. But I think government should just move faster than they are doing, so that this lady can be brought back to us, and the family can regain their peace, regain their humanity, and feel a sense of worth going forward at the family.
The cry and pain of a mother, Rebecca Sharibu, the mother of Leah, there, saying that she's willing, to take an insurgent, a Boko Haram, as an in-law, if that means bringing back her child, right, to stop this unending negotiations. We are going to go on a break, Doctor, shortly. But when we come back, we look at what's your sense of that. This unending negotiation for her release, calling the entire process, the mother calling the entire process a scam. That's what she says. So your sense of that when we come back from this short break. Still hanging there. We'll be back in a bit with more. Stay with us. I still have Associate Professor Baze University, Dr. Biodun Adeniyi, here in the morning show with discussing Leah's incarceration by Boko Haram. The fact that the mother says, I don't mind. I would accept even a Boko Haram as a husband, an in-law, if that means stopping these unending negotiations to get her back. And the mother calls it a scam. Doctor, what's your sense? You can also add this, that if government indeed is seriously doing anything about this girl's release from incarceration, why are we not getting feedback? I mean, Nigerians, and then, of course, the mother and the father. I've had to interview the father sometime, way back.
Yeah, indeed, this thing, it can be very, very complex, and terrorists have a pattern. They have a pattern, a way of operating. They like to hold you by your balls where you are weakest. They like to hold you at points, that will pain you more, that will inflict the maximum injury on you, whether psychologically or physically. You know how prized a child like Boko Haram, like Leah Sharibu is, and the kind of global attention that she has attracted so far, and that's what terrorists enjoy, So when you are held by the balls by terrorists, so to say, they don't want to, they are not very, they don't pander to reason. They are not very logical. All they deal with is, that's why they are called terrorists, They just want to inflict the maximum pain on you. It doesn't matter how it comes. It doesn't matter whose blood is shed. So I think that has created some kind of complexity around it. And when the other side, when government tries to intervene through negotiation, they don't mind asking for the most impossible thing, and of course the other side is a little more reasonable. You want to continue to pull back and just see if there's going to be a meeting point. So I think it's this ding-dong, this tension between the terrorists and the negotiators, perhaps on the government side, perhaps the family side, that is causing you frustration, which is why the mother is unfortunately saying it's a scam. So you cannot really say we won't be witnessing some of these descriptions. It's just a reflection of the continuing frustration around the detention or around the captivity of the innocent child. But ultimately we'll just continue to pray that their hearts will be touched, so that they will just see reason and let her go eventually. And not just letting her go, that she will come back, complete, come back in one piece, in situations like this, we remember our Creator, and that's the only thing one can say in this circumstance. It's very unfortunate, but that's what it is, indeed.
That's what it is, unfortunate indeed.
There is. It's a very harsh reality.
Yeah, it's a very, very harsh reality.
For many people. Well, I think one story that we also can't avoid and get away from is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, how it's still raging on in the very forefront of the current times. And that brings us to a whole host of different issues and stories that have come out during this week. One of them is the news that President Muhammadu Buhari has allowed for the importation or the bringing over of the COVID organics beverage, or can we call it a beverage, or the substance being made?
Actually.
The tea being made over there in Madagascar. What are your thoughts on that? I know that there have been lots of pharmaceutical leaders who have not been happy with that decision because there isn't a lot of medical or scientific backing to this product. What do you think here?
Yeah, Adefemi, I think the visits by the Madagascar president and the acceptance of the organic it's a public relations thing just yet. It's not been approved by the government, and it's not a complex thing. Madagascar is a fellow African country, and the president is very respectful of our president, So I just see that visit as shuttle diplomacy, meant to promote their own products. And of course, you expect some politics around this kind of development. But if eventually it becomes very potent, there's nothing the world can do. They have to accept it, even if it's an unorthodox variant of medicine. But of course, we know that there's always a tension, between orthodox and unorthodox medicine, and it has come to the fore in this time of this pandemic. But this tension will actually continue. But we need to be circumspect, especially in a situation where there's no solution for COVID-19 and everybody is frenetic. There's a frenzy around the search for this solution. So patience is actually very needed, and I don't see anything wrong the president of Madagascar visiting us. It's international public relations, and every nation is permitted to carry it out, And do not forget that WHO has also come to say that product attention shouldn't be paid to it just yet until it has gone through clinical trial. Nothing is wrong with this, and of course the president also went further to say that science will still be privileged over this production. So it's just still a matter of time before we can begin to before we can be definitive around what to say and what not to say, around what to believe and what not to believe. But we cannot deny the fact that we're in a period of experiment, and every experimentalist has to be tolerated in this circumstance.
Yeah. I'll get back to that COVID-19, the COVID organics it's called, and what the PTF chairman said about it, but you are an academic. So I want to address this issue of ASU and the government and EPIs. If we have time, I'll get back to the COVID organics. You're an ASU professor, like I said. Why is the Academic Staff Union of Universities being, if you like, recalcitrant about the EPIs and seemingly making a simple matter convoluted?
Well, yes, I'm an academic, but I'm not a member of ASU because I'm in a private university. Okay. But essentially, we are colleagues. We meet at conferences, at workshops, and I sympathize with the applied. And you say they are convoluted, but I need us to also understand that these are people who believe in systems, who believe in procedures, and who are there very strictly to it. earn living from nowhere else, even if there are allegations here and there, other than the salaries that they earn. So you expect that they will just want processes, to be as mathematical as possible. They want procedures, to be as clean as possible, as immaculate, as spick and span as it can be possible. So when they stick to principles, when they stick to procedures, or they stick to decisions, the one that is politically minded may think they are being difficult, may think they are convoluting the process. But I would rather want to see that they are just sticklers to principles, sticklers to decision. And in doing that, they're probably not meaning any harm. They're not out to hurt government. They're just asking government to be salutary in the way they comply with the agreement. That's what I can say, really. And what government needs to do is what I do know that government can do. Government is very powerful, and I never want to undermine the intelligence of government officials, because I know in government are some of the best minds as well. If they come to the table and discuss genuinely with these scholars, I do not see a reason why they won't be compromised at the end of the day. But the problem is the attainment or the achievement of some level of genuineness, in the course of their discussion. There's always a fakeness, there's always a lack of commitment, a lack of conscientiousness, and that's where the gap is. So our ability to break the gap will also define how quickly we can find a solution between government and ASU, indeed.
ASU is saying that IPIS is a fraud because lecturers are paid without capturing their biometrics and other information. They're urging the government to consider the university transparency accountability solution. Looks to me like ASU wants to, I don't know, eat their cake and have it. But you can also talk about what they're saying, that the government should consider university transparency accountability. I don't understand that. I don't know what they mean, but I guess that you might have an idea of what they're talking about.
Yeah, but ordinarily, ideally, the university is a center of excellence. The society that we live in, it's premised on the solutions, proffered by universities, because universities are centers of research, that they are the bedrock of knowledge, the place for the production of knowledge and intelligence, So if they had challenged the prescription of federal government and came up with their own, what they did was just what we ordinarily expect them to do. But the reluctance of government to list or to even investigate, to check, what they are prescribed is what I considered the problem. So what you read out is the alternative that ASU, prescribed, which government is reluctant to adhere by, arguing that, why should they determine how they should be paid?
Indeed.
They are employers.
An employer, yeah.
And they are their employers, and as a result, they should.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. Employee doesn't determine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, their employees should not determine how they should be paid. But we need to understand that ASU is a different kind of public service. We are not saying that they are special or they are above the other, but it's a different kind of public service. We're talking about intellectuals here. We're talking about people whose reward is literally still in heaven, and they make a lot of sacrifices. We're just like other professionals, but these are thinkers, and their success is defined by collaboration, by endless experimentation, collaboration on the planetary level, on the national level, and even with community. So if they say that we cannot be paid through this way just because of this and that, I think it's just okay for a government that is concerned about research and development, to give them that honor. It's not a panacea for corruption, but these things can be well investigated so that it can be much more transparent and accountable if that is what the government, the fear of the government is. So I believe that some of these things is just a problem of consultation. With complete, better, improved consultation, I believe that we can get around it.
Yeah, agreeing to disagree. All right, we'll keep you on post there when we get back from this break. Okay, Adefemi, I think
yes,
you want a
please.
question.
I would actually like us to move back over to COVID-19 and to talk about the risks being associated with people there. You've got former President Olusegun Obasanjo saying that 80 million people are at risk of being unable to feed, the issues with poverty, and then you've got the case of the government having palliatives and then having the lockdown. We will continue this conversation after the break. Dr. Biodun Adeniyi, please do stay with us. Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. We are still talking to the Associate Professor at Baze University, Dr. Biodun Adeniyi. And before we went on break, I was talking about the different situations we've been finding ourselves over the few months that we've been battling COVID-19. Beforehand, there was complaints that perhaps people weren't being protected as well as enough by the government. And then the government here in Lagos, for example, started with a partial shutdown, which then grew into the total lockdown for around 5 weeks. We've now come out of that with the government giving palliatives to the people, but those palliatives obviously not reaching everyone in need. And then those who haven't been able to receive have been calling on the government to be allowed to go back to work. They've since been allowed to go back to work, but then they've been putting themselves at risk again. So what do you think the solution is here? How are people supposed to keep safe yet maintain their livelihoods during this time?
I think maybe that's a very, very tricky question, which I also believe that government is still struggling to cope with, and that's why I like to use the word oftentimes catch-22 situation, whatever we do here has implication. But the silver lining or the good thing about it is that we're not alone. It is a global thing, it's planetary, and we can see practically every nation struggling to grapple with the pandemic. And of course, it's a reminder again of the fact that the world is retracting. The world is recoiling, We have been in a world of globalization, but now we are witnessing deglobalization. We are recoiling into ourselves, not just at the planetary level, but also at the national level, and even at the level of the South, coming back to ourselves, coming back to the family, coming back at the level of nationalism and at the level of global conduct of affairs. So difficult times, a time of change, where change has come upon us, and whether we like it or not, we have to accept that change. That change is what we are primarily finding very difficult. We've been an informal economy, where people just live by the day, their life is subsistence, and those people are probably the worst hit, with this crisis. The urban poor and the rural poor as well. They are the ones that will continue to complain because palliatives, we hear palliatives, billions of palliatives every day. And not many people can actually say they have been beneficiaries. You look around, you don't see any beneficiary, and yet you hear billions being expended on palliatives. These things can be very, very irritating, and at the same time, you are not letting us go out to work. So that's the position from where people are coming from, and you can actually understand with them. But again, we do not have any option other than to go back to government, asking them to do more, not necessarily at the level of palliatives, but at the level of how they pass on information to the people so that they can help their understanding further, but you cannot help understanding if people are hungry. Hunger is key, and government shouldn't just be federal in the circumstance. State governments will have to be involved in this effort as well. And what about the local governments that are probably comatose in our system? They all have to be involved in the administration of these palliatives or in the management of the crisis as the case could be. Yes, government, they are making efforts, but more efforts will have to be made, through the provision of palliatives, through campaigns, communication, so that we can all be on the same page. It's not just, we don't necessarily have to concentrate on the elites alone. The rural poor, the urban poor, those are the lower rung of the economic ladder, probably need information more. Yeah. And these are the people that could form the army of protesters, God forbid, if they are not properly attended to in the future.
Yeah, Doctor, I was watching, actually, I think I was presenting the news that particular day, when some churches in America, came together. Actually, pastors, of some churches came together on a rally and said that they are disobeying the state government's order and that they're going to reopen their churches, and that if anybody should be arrested, it should be them, not the congregants, congregation. Now in Nigeria, Borno has allowed churches and mosques to open. But instead the governor says, yes, people can go back to church, but only 50. And you know how the spiritual part of life is very important. What's your sense of opening the churches, allowing the churches to come back on stream, with some conditions, of course?
Well, right from time immemorial, there has been this perpetual conflict between politics and religion. And in matters like this, when there's a crisis like this, we always expect that it will rear its head. And that's what we are seeing again. But when politics and religion, or when governance and religion are going to come, when they come at loggerhead, I think it's just very reasonable, very logical for us to privilege governance over religion. We know we need that spiritual aspect of it, but spirituality is largely personal. It's largely an inward thing. And when it's about safety, we need to pander more to reason and science. And the purveyors of reason and science are usually governments. And we do know that they can complain, but they do not have the force, to bring this about. All they can do is just moral suasion, trying to convince government, trying to get involved in some advocacy, asking government to change its mind. And I've seen some very respectable religious leaders, said that if markets can be open, if banks can be open, why not churches? Very desirable opinion. You cannot fault them because these people have very large followers, very respected. But we just need them to come to a little more understanding that, we have seen countries around the world where infection rose rose through the cocoon of worship centers. It happened in South Korea, and we don't want that to be replicated here. It's going to be very dangerous for us. So I think there has to be more explaining, more explanation, more dialogue between politics and religion, between governance and religious leaders. And that's why I've said earlier that in the communications chain, religious leaders are very critical because these people have very large following, people who believe in them, even much more than they believe in government leaders. Much more than
the hope that they sell.
And these are people that government should not undermine, really. Yes. Right. And these are people that government should be concerned about. So we need mutual respect for each other. And if we respect each other, yes, of course there will be dissents, there will be disagreement, but we can always resolve them rather than breaking bones unnecessarily over matters that are
they can be resolved amicably, disagreeing to agree.
Absolutely. Yeah. Much like any other country in the world, I do think the COVID-19 pandemic caught Nigeria unawares. Like I said, it caught many countries unprepared for the eventualities of this. For Nigeria specifically, because we have such a heavy reliance on imports, it hit us especially hard, especially in the areas like pharmaceuticals, because now countries that we relied on to give us medicines had to focus on their domestic demand and no longer, even if they wanted to export to Nigeria, couldn't do so because of the many constraints on movement. That has left a country like Nigeria almost a little stranded and had left us with our hands tied behind our backs because there is the talent and the ability to produce drugs locally, but there isn't the infrastructure. So leading on to that, we know that the Central Bank of Nigeria, they've developed a framework for grants to researchers, for pharmaceuticals and for science. So looking ahead to the end of this current pandemic, do you think the lasting legacy of COVID-19 in Nigeria could be one of positivity, one that forced us to shift the way we look on imports and perhaps finally put Nigeria in a position where we can literally eat what we create for ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Adefemi, it's a learning curve for us, and we have to accept it as that, like that, and perhaps propel ourselves further onto a greater, higher pedestal than we have always been. It came to us as a shock, not because we didn't know it was going to come, but because our infrastructure, health infrastructure, were very weak. And if health infrastructure of even more sophisticated countries were collapsing under the pandemic, then what would you make of our own? So far, we haven't been very lucky because it started coming to Africa at a later time, so we had some time to prepare. But even then, we're still struggling now. We don't know where we are going to. But overall, it's like in every challenge, we are likely to learn some new things, and especially in the area of believing more in ourselves, really relying less on importation, looking at homegrown solutions, becoming much more ingenious, much more creative, and believing that some of the many things that we'll go outside to find can actually be found here. There's nothing wrong in developing our hospitals. There's nothing wrong in developing our schools. Now schools are all over the world are shut down. There's nothing wrong in making sure that our infrastructure, match those of infrastructures even in the most developed countries in the world. Perhaps it's a challenge to our leaders. It's also a challenge to us, the people, to increase our advocacy, to increase our campaign to our leaders, to be much more responsive than they probably have been.
Yeah.
And a lot of them have also come to this realization. They've come to this realization because we hear them in press conferences saying that our infrastructures are weak, so we have to move very fast. Now they are coming to this recognition. They are understanding these facts, But it's not just about understanding. It's about the fact also propelling them to action. So that
the paradigm
where
shift.
we think we should have been in the last 10, 20, 30 years. Paradigm shift. Thank you, Indy. So that's exactly the kind of argument we should be having. And that's what we'll be looking forward to.
Before we let you go, Doctor.
The world is recoiling. The world is on a retract. Yes.
Yeah, before we let you go, we can but talk about the military. The military, they seem to be gaining ground against Boko Haram of late. I mean, in the news, 33 women, 39 children were dropped off by the Boko Haram terrorists, and there are talks that some of them want to also surrender. What do you attribute this to, and sustenance of it going forward?
Oh yeah, I think it's good news for us, and we have to continue to salute our military for being painstaking over the past 10 or 11 years. It's something that we know should have been brought to an end, if not for some imperfections in the past. So the fact that they are bringing it close to an end, now we're getting to the end, it's something that we've been expecting, but they deserve commendation anyway. And all we can only say is to continue with our charge to them, to be encouraged, to know that, we are with them in our prayers, and the Lord Almighty will sustain them through the fight.
Indeed, a good place to stop with that fantastic prayer for the military. We can but pray for them and encourage them.
Absolutely, that's a good place to stop. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Biodun Adeniyi from Baze University.